Libby Chamberlain, she, her. I am based in Colorado, and I've been with Community Change 1 year. I graduated Trachtenberg with an MPP in 2020. And as Denise said, I have recruited some of my colleagues at Community Change from a range of different teams um, to reflect on our work and our organization with you all. I think we'll just start with like intros, and I'll just like popcorn it around to different folks, but maybe like just like overview of your team and your role. So I am on the policy and advocacy team. We are small but mighty, and my title is Senior Policy Advisor for State and Local Policy. So I specialize in states, localities, counties, cities, um, and I like to describe my work as doing a lot of demystifying bureaucracy and using my experience working in state legislatures, um, on state budgets specifically, kind of as a demystifying that, using that as a tool for good for organizations, grassroots groups who might feel intimidated by those processes. But that's really a process where a lot of power lies. And I like to use the expertise that I built kind of on the inside now for our grassroots groups who are learning to leverage that particular power for themselves and for their goals. Um, I will pass it to Erica.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Erica Grahowski Valdivia. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm out in Los Angeles, California, though I'm originally from Miami, Florida. So shout out any Florida folks. And I graduated in 2013 with my BA. I studied sociology, minored in English. And my role here at Community Change is I'm an electoral organizer on the electoral team. We are not small, but I do think we're mighty. I've been with Community Change for 6.5 years now as an organizer. And I've been organizing for well over a decade, and it started at GW, actually. That's where I got my organizing chops and where I learned how to do a lot of the things that I do now. And I like to think of myself now in this role as like an organizer's organizer. So we work, and I work very closely with community organizations in battleground states, community organizers in battleground states, thinking how to leverage sort of their like issue and policy-based campaigns, so like childcare for all or healthcare for all, and have that make an impact in the elections, whether that's like a mayoral race or the presidential. And I will pass it to Mads, who's also on my team.
Thanks, Erica. Hey, everybody. Oh, my internet just cut. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Mads. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also on the electoral team with Erica. I've been at Community Change for, it'll be 4 years in January, which has gone by really fast. As I'm from Connecticut, which if there's anyone from Connecticut on the call, my condolences. I, as a project manager, kind of keep the wheels running for the team. I really like building systems and processes that make things run smoothly. I do a lot of like logistical and admin stuff like calendaring and getting money moved between teams and to partners, expenses and invoices and that kind of stuff. And yeah, set up systems to make sure that everyone knows what the projects are, where they're at, and what the next steps are. When I was in college, I was very into my agenda and keeping really detailed notes. And I kind of now get paid to do that for a bunch of other people, which feels great for me and the way my brain works and my neurodivergence. I like being able to have an impact in elections with Erica here at Community Change. And I will pass it to Mika.
Awesome. Hey folks, Mika K. McDonald, she, her. I'm the creative director at Community Change. I'm based in DC. I sit on the communications team, and my role is pretty nebulous, but it includes overseeing the design and visuals with Community Change. Right now, it's also running our TikTok creator program with our ambassadors to make sure that we're supporting other programs within the organization. It's running some of our AI programming and exploration. and it's supporting comms team from campaign to rapid response pieces. And I'll pass it to Anna.
Thanks, Mika. Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Fabregas. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also based in Washington, D.C., and I've been with Community Change for over 5 years now, which is wild to say and to think about. But I've been on a number of different teams at the organization. I offered support to our executive team when I first started in 2020. I was a project manager and did a lot of logistical support for our Black Freedom Collective. And now my role lives like firmly in our policy and advocacy team, which means that Libby and I are teammates. My role is also a project manager. Specifically, I work on what we call ideas work at the organization. And so while Libby does a lot of stuff in response to like ongoing and emerging legislative changes, I work on stuff that kind of bridges the gap between immediate legislative responses and our organization's essentially like long-term view for our movement and for the future and for the changes that we want to see across the country. So at this time, like that kind of shows up in a number of different ways. If I do policy research, some of it is what we call oppositional research. So I worked with a colleague on a really big memo breaking down all of the scary stuff that's in Project 2025, particularly with the implications that could affect our organization's work. And credit where it's due, the first person to have done that at the organization related specifically to Project 2025 is Mads. So thank you to Mads for doing that because we were only building on your work and we appreciate you forever. Another thing I really am happy to do at the organization and really glad as part of my job is community research. So at the moment, that means that I'm working on a multi-year project that's focused on building a vision of anti-racist health systems in the United States. And so the particular community research that I do is in the form of focus groups or facilitated discussion spaces where we get folks from across the country and also folks that are directly impacted and parts of the communities that our our partner organizations work with to hear their experiences interacting with the healthcare systems across the country, and B, most importantly, to hear and collect their ideas for change so that we can build that into our research findings. Unlike everybody here, I grew up in Toronto. I'm a Canadian. And so I did my undergrad at a university in Canada, and I did my master's also in international development in The Hague in the Netherlands. So long and windy road to get here to Community Change, but I'm really happy to call it home. And then finally, I am also, along with a bunch of other folks on this call, a proud member of our staff union. Community Change is a part of the Nonprofit Professionals Employees Union, which is something that we're really proud of and just like really glad to be a part of. And in particular, I do a lot of equity related work also with Matt. Libby, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks. I was just finding the union website, since that is sometimes an interesting thing for people to know about. I didn't know about in grad school. Cool. So unconventional, but we have all introduced what sound like fairly disparate teams and work buckets without really introducing the organization as a whole. So maybe that's instructive. To you all, and I will just kind of overview Community Change generally so you can see maybe how we all weave together. So our organization we are an organizing organization. Our mission is to build the capacity of people with low incomes, and especially communities of color with low incomes, to build their own power, to be their best advocates at the state, local, and federal level. And we do this through electoral work, as you heard from Erica and Mads. We do this through policy research, as I shared, and then connective tissue work that Anna described, and then through like really tight comm strategy, as Mika described. And we like to serve grassroots groups across the nation. And like a moment of personal privilege as like the state and local person, that can be a lot. There are like a lot of states. And that is just keeps you nimble, right? And there's like really rich learning that can happen between our partners, like what's worked in certain places, what hasn't worked. And that creates like a pretty dynamic just ecosystem for, I think, my personal learning, and maybe everyone can, disagree with that or what have you. But I think there's like a lot of like richness to be gained from working with grassroots groups across the country, who are all pointed at somewhat similar electoral ends. We do have a C4 arm, so we do have like a political arm, and we are, our appropriate firewall is up right now. But as you can tell, we work towards kind of, I would say, left of center aims. That should just be stated out at the outset. And yeah, we do that through a number of different pathways: policy research, comms, electoral. Is there anything else I am missing? Yeah, Erica, what did you want to add?
So we host volunteer calls every Wednesday night, and one of the things that we like to name in the calls when we talk about who community changes, we were founded out of the Bobby Kennedy legacy, in their war on economic poverty. That was like the big thing in the 60s, the war on language. And we were also founded out of the MLK legacy. So that's like a big part of our organization and our history, is like that social justice and economic justice work.
I can jump in briefly and say that that kind of 50+ year span, I think, is pretty unique among a lot of organizations, especially ones that operate on both like national and local levels, and kind of more like that type of grassroots organizing is in our DNA. And what I'm really proud of with community change and community change action is how we like keep fighting to hold true to that type of bedrock of organizing, while also making sure that we are like reaching people where they are. So that looks like a lot of like hybrid campaigns, bringing more people into the work. And yeah, I'm really excited.
I love that. And as you all can tell from the discourse in the chat right now, we are encouraged to bring the whole self to work, and we are very much ourselves. So we're goofing in the chat, but I think those are all very important additions, and I'd be very glad to just open it to questions from students at this time. And if none bubble to the surface, I'm happy to reflect more or turn it to Denise for some prompts.
I want to give people a chance to see if there's some questions here that people want to ask.
Yeah, and happy to keep an eye on the chat if typing in there is
Great.
better
And I
for
see
you.
Carrie just unmuted herself, so I'm gonna give the floor to Carrie Harper.
Hello, thank you all for coming. My name is Carrie Harper. I use she, her pronouns. I am a second semester MPP student here at the Trachtenberg School. And my concentration is in social policy, and I mostly work in my concentration is like women, gender, and sexuality studies. I was also an English minor. Whoever said that should have been my major, but that's okay. But my question for you all is like, I guess in being in the Trachtenberg School, a lot of my background is in the advocacy and grassroots background. Like all my internship experiences with grassroots organizing and putting that forward. So I guess the question that, or I don't even know if this is a very well-defined question, but how do you merge both worlds of both like being in the Trachtenberg School, taking that education and applying it more in an advocacy space? I think that's where I'm trying to like mesh the worlds and use the information I'm learning to better create like a step forward, like you all have mentioned. And then just broadly as well, what have your experiences been like job searching with this type of background and all of that? I'm sorry if that was a lot, and I'm so happy to clarify.
Libby, because we're policy team folks, do you mind if I start this one? Okay, thanks. Carrie, it's nice to meet you. I can't speak to having this like particular like higher education background and how it's led me to work. My master's degree is in gender conflict and human rights. However, my focus was on gender studies, particularly masculinities. So like I feel you on that side. I can say that in terms of finding ways to be able to apply like really sophisticated advocacy experience and also like education towards the like organizing world. It's essentially understanding and like working with the ethos that people know what they need. And so especially when we're working with organizers, it's not only that people know what they need, but they know they're working on trying to be able to get those things. And so at least from the policy side, the way that we generally like to approach it is to, like, first and foremost, believe and honor the fact that folks know exactly what it is that they're fighting for, and then to be able to offer just a different lens of approach to that organizing stuff. And so sometimes that shows up in like bringing and like supporting partners and organizers as they go into legislative meetings with their own representatives. A lot of the time it's being like co-conspirators or co-strategists with our organizers, both at Community Change and the partner organizations that we work with. And then a lot of the time too, it's a lot of background research that we can apply to help folks strengthen their strategy. And so that's like the critical lens that we offer folks, so that organizers who know how to do the organizing can do their jobs not only incredibly well, but with the support of folks like us.
That was very well said, Anna. I'm happy to jump in, and then I think Mads has an addition they'd like to make as well. So Erica, I keep forgetting that you also went to GW. It's like, I think I'm the only GW person. So I went to Trachtenberg, and when I was in Trachtenberg, I was working in the U.S. Senate, and I was in a very kind of like different. I was working for a member who's seen as a bit more of an organizer in the body, but I was very much like in this kind of like narrow, sounds dismissive, but like a little bit of a narrow policy focus. And it's only like kind of since leaving DC, since moving around states, since working in state legislatures, that I've kind of like opened up my like blinders a little bit, and Community Change has really privileged that and been a great place to like bring all those skills home and feel like I'm directing them towards an end. And so maybe part of your question, Carrie, about like what did I like leverage from my GW time currently? I think one thing that was very helpful to think about when I was going through school was like, what is a tool that I like need to learn in a class to be able to like talk about with an expert versus what's a tool I need to be an expert in? Like, I need to be comfortable doing a cost benefit analysis. I also need to be comfortable critiquing why a cost benefit analysis doesn't tell us the whole story, like why that tool is flawed, like why that tool might lead us to like some like quantitative end that actually isn't the best social end, that might actually hurt some people. And I don't need to be an expert in doing a cost benefit analysis. I just need to understand the tool and understand like, some of like the shadows of the tool. And I would say that that's accurate now. Like, I don't do cost benefit analysis, but I do, need to sit here and adjust for inflation because I need to understand like how much it costs to run a jobs program for people who are leaving carceral settings. But the only program we have an example of is from 2002, and so I need to like adjust the cost of all of like anything that was in that programming to adjust the cost for today's dollars. Like, that's kind of to just contrast like the hard tools that I would have used at Trachtenberg with the current work that I do. Mads, do you have additions?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little about the grassroots and like post-grad aspects of the question. I didn't get a master's degree, so I can only speak to what my experience was like after graduating undergrad. But I moved to DC without a job. I was privileged enough that my parents could pay my rent for 2 months. And in those 2 months, I was applying to hundreds of jobs and eventually landed one that was temping for a advocacy organization that was nonpartisan. And I was actually there for 5 years. I really liked my coworkers, and I think liking your coworkers is honestly one of the most important parts of liking whatever job you end up, because it's the people you spend the most time with, honestly, in your life for a while, the duration that you're in that job. So that's super important. And it was nonpartisan grassroots advocacy. So I was like running a grassroots program, getting people, it was doctors, getting doctors to advocate for the things that they wanted for themselves. And I eventually realized that the nonpartisan aspect of it didn't work for me. And I think a lot of grassroots advocacy organizations are pretty nonpartisan because they're trying to get their goals accomplished and reach as many people as possible, because grassroots means like reaching as many people as possible towards one goal. And that worked for a while, and then eventually it didn't for me. And I ended up moving to Community Change because I really felt like I needed work that was more values aligned. And even though like my values aligned with the grassroots work I was doing, the nonpartisan stuff didn't end up working for me. So just wanted to share that temping is okay. And your first job or whatever, you're in a master's program, so maybe you've worked a lot before, but it doesn't have to be your dream job to end up getting to a place that you really like and are values aligned at eventually down the line.
Yeah, similarly to Mads, my first job after a degree was with a private consulting firm because I needed to pay my rent and I needed to figure out how to get health insurance. And then I used that and those skills, as well as my education, to kind of try and shift a little bit further towards like the type of advocacy organization I wanted to work for. And then so I worked at one immediately after that, which was great, and then was able to work at Community Change, which was even closer to kind of the values that I believed in. I will also say that like and this is kind of implicit through all of this, but you don't have to, I don't think you have to have and reflect like all of your values in your job or like holding out for that perfect job. I know a lot of us, like, we do organizing and we do this work as a part of our day-to-day job, which is an immense privilege to get health care and help and a paycheck to be able to do work that we like. I, do a lot of like volunteering with like artist communities or with like running communities, doing like different types of power building. And that's not in my day job, but I'm able to take those skills elsewhere and find like multiple outlets. And so like thinking of it as like a big outlet and an important one, because it's also a transaction to help you to live, and allowing it not to be like your whole identity.
I know we're going to ask for other questions. I've been inspired and I want to jump in here because I feel like we've kind of shifted a little bit, but I'll also name like, I jumped around a lot within this realm of work. Like I worked for the party for a little bit. I worked for a lobbying organization. I worked for the state ledge. Like I kind of jumped around doing all different types of organizing before I found the niche that really worked for me. And in this case, yes, the party being the Democratic Party in this case. Yeah, before I found my niche, and kind of like Mad said, like I wanted to find some place that was stable, that was doing really good work, but that aligned at least with my values somewhat. I sometimes tend to be a little bit more to the left of a lot of people, but that's okay. And I think it was also okay to like jump around, especially when you're young and you're getting your career started. Like it is reasonable to do a job for a year, 18 months and say, nope, this role just wasn't for me. And that's okay. And I learned from it and I'm going to try the next thing.
I'm gonna
Huge.
Oops,
Yeah,
sorry.
questions.
Oh, I'm
Sorry.
going to chime in for a question that students often are really afraid to ask. And some of these have to do with the myths or realities around salary, pay, compensation in this line of work, and also the intensity of this type of work and your ability, both in terms of just logistically, the balance that you guys find in your organization. Is that typical in terms of managing and how much you're having to be on, particularly if something comes up that becomes a crisis? And just overall, this field, I know from somebody who worked in the field for a while, it was very, very hard for my psyche to balance hearing everything that was going on and being able to separate from that. So I know that's kind of a multi-part question, but I think this is something that students are often curious about, and I would love to hear from perspective of both your organization as well as other people's organizations, this field overall. Therapy. I love these responses. This is great. Okay, I will open it up and let you all go.
Can I jump in with some of the pay questions and the intensity questions as an electoral person? So fam, I have worked as a unpaid intern, as a paid intern who after 6 months got $500. So I was paid. I have when I worked in the state ledge, I was making about $28,000 a year in a major urban area. And then I got to work in a couple different places. And I finally got to Community Change, that I feel like it's actually a little bit rare in some cases how much we respect our employees and the salary and the time commitment that we give. I really want to shout out our union here. If you've ever considered working for a union or working for a place that has a union, it is one of the biggest impacts on my quality of life that I've ever experienced. And I've been working in left of center politics for close to 15 years, if that's how long ago it was since I graduated, which is kind of scary. So uh, shout out unions. But I will say, like, I prioritized finding what the right work meant to me. Like, I prioritized finding the right fit. And so I took a salary hit to do that in some instances. And I was, like I said, like Matt said earlier, very privileged to have a support network from my family to make that happen. When I lived at DC for a while, and when I moved back to Miami, I lived with my mom, and she was like totally fine with it while I, made $28,000 working in the Florida State Legislature. And she wasn't charging me rent, and that like worked out for me. So I really like I spent my time being like, it's okay if I don't make the money right now because I want to build this up. I know that's not true for everyone. And so what I would say is be both intentional about the salary that you need to survive and even thrive, while also looking for the right line of work. I think fortunately in DC, there's a lot of places that will offer that. Not always true in other parts of the country, unfortunately. And in terms of intensity of the work, so as an electoral person, as you can imagine, in odd years, the work is not as crazy. We have a few municipal elections that happen in like Tucson and Philadelphia, but not the big sort of hooplas that we're seeing right now. And I've kind of knew that going into this work, right? And that's also why I love community change, because of that stability that it gives me. When I worked for the party, I might have been out of work for 6 months when I was working on like campaigns with candidates. Didn't have healthcare, wasn't putting in anything into my 401k. And at a certain point, I just found that incredibly stressful. And so when I was ready to move on from that work, I was looking for a place that would allow me to grow my skill set and allow me to continue working, even if it was in these smaller municipals during these like low intensity years, but still being able to do all of that electoral pieces that I love doing. We're like less than 30 days out from an election right now. I am working 15-hour days. That's okay. I signed up for this. I love this because I know next year I will not be working 15-hour days in October. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything to jump in.
My first job that was in the private sector, I also, uh-oh, I think my Zoom might be about to crash. If it crashes, I'll just come back in. But I actually, while I was doing that, and this is how I got connected to community change ultimately, is I applied to one of their fellowships, to the communications fellowship. And so even while I had a full-time job that I didn't love, I found like part-time opportunity to continue meeting people in that space and finding a way in. Also, you can check out the jobs that are left job board. That's a Google group. I can put the link in, but there's a lot of jobs that come through that way too. I'll also name that, the jobs that each of us have right now didn't necessarily exist in the capacity that they exist in now, like 5 years ago. And so prioritizing and finding ways to work on what drives you and what you're good at is important. Things to like women, honestly, on the comms team. I like the job that I have right now, I was able to help shape, and then I had to apply for it. But there was a huge gap in how we were looking at TikTok and Instagram creators, and a huge gap in how we were looking at accessible design, and you can shape those types of pieces as well and advocate for them. A lot of jobs right now are kind of built from like a white male perspective on how campaigns should be run, or how a campaign was run in like the 80s, which is not necessarily, there's a lot of good things from the 80s, but not everything we need to keep. And so reimagining the role too.
Yes to everything that they've all said. Something else that I agree, Erica talking about how like there are seasons of really high intensity and seasons of a lot less high intensity is something that I experience as well, not to the same degrees that the folks at the electoral team do, because you all do work that I like probably couldn't, and we thank you forever for that. But I also have like ebb and flows of like demands, I would say, of my capacity. And that allows me to kind of plan around kind of my work-life balance, and then also communicate that kind of stuff with my supervisor. And somebody mentioned it earlier, but the things that I would most highly recommend in and for every single job is to keep an eye out for not only having like really good colleagues, but making sure that the working styles of you and your supervisor that you'll usually meet as like a hiring manager work really well. Find what kinds of questions work best for you during an interview process so that you can kind of get a read on the type of person that they are, because not everyone gels super, super well. But when you gel with your supervisor, everything suddenly feels a lot more doable. Even the hard stuff is still hard, but at least it's not hard and upsetting. And if we are going to be working in like very emotionally intense work like politics, the work to be done is already going to be hard and upsetting. So to have someone that like trusts you, believes in you, and then also is interested and particularly invested in fostering your leadership and your skills development, that is something that I personally got to experience at Community Change, which is why I do the work that I do now. Like I said in the chat, I started as a temp, and now I get to do like focus groups and community research stuff. And that's because I had supervisors that saw my skills. I also was very clear and forthcoming with like the kinds of skills that I wanted to build. And so I had like a really nice and very lucky like convergence of circumstances that brought me to my space. But it's also really because I found a supervisor that I really liked. And we decided to invest in each other, essentially. And then before I pass the mic to other folks, another really important thing that you can do in any and every workplace is find some trusted colleagues, and then talk about your salaries. Compare numbers, get specific, because you can then work with each other to strategize to figure out how to make sure that pay equity is actually a thing that's happening and not something that we're just kind of hoping for. And I have personal experience of benefiting from that greatly. So don't be afraid of talking about specific numbers with folks, especially trusted coworkers. It is not unprofessional. And if anyone tries to tell you that they are, especially if they have more structural power than you, then that is manipulative, friends. And please don't buy into that. It's very, very important. Also, yes, to Mads, we work together as a union to share pay transparency, and it's been incredibly helpful for salary negotiations.
Cool. Adrian, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Adrian put a great question in the chat about do you have any recommendations for people who are looking to get into organizations like Community Change who don't have advocacy, who don't do advocacy work, but and also doesn't have a lot of experience working with nonprofits and in organizing. And I'll just, oh yeah, Mika, I'll lead off and say, my road to Community Change was not as like I am an organizer. It was like really I am a wonk. I am in a legislature. I am like in these nonpartisan offices doing like writing fiscal notes, which are like CBO scores at the federal level. Fiscal notes are like the price tag on bills at the state level. And I found a niche that I like basically took a gamble on myself and found a niche. I was like, I think states are like where people are going to be turning more for actual policy change as so we're 2020, we're in the waning years of the Trump administration. Things are feeling pretty hopeless, like nationally. And I was like, I think it's going to be states. So I took this gamble and I got a short-term contract at first with the state of Vermont. And I'll just like offer a quick anecdote on that, which is I feel like thank you, Hannah. We do love policy nerds. So I took this gamble. I was like, I think it's going to be states. I have this kind of like organizer heart, but I have this policy wonk skill set. And I got a research contract with a nonpartisan fiscal office in Vermont. And one of the main things I did there was, sounds so nerdy, but I'm talking to my people. I calculated the tax exemption, the lost revenue the state would experience if they got rid of the sales tax on tampons and other menstrual products. So I did like tampon math for the state of Vermont. It's a very small state. It's an old state. It's like not that much money. The state would not forego that much money in tax revenue if they got rid of that tax. And they did. Yeah, thank you. It's girl math. Thank you. And they did the next session. They passed a bill where they removed the tax on menstrual products using like my math. And I didn't think of that as organizing at the time, but now I look back and like frankly, that's one of the proudest projects I've ever done, was like make the case for like, while I do think equitable taxation, like how we raise our revenue and who we raise it from is like the thing alongside voting rights, like the thing that undergirds our democracy. There are also really reasonable times that something that should go without being taxed for a certain population. And I was able to demonstrate that using skills that I had obtained in this graduate degree. And I didn't know it was organizing until I got to community change and was like, wait a minute, I can make a really good case for like this particular policy in this particular instance. So to your question, I did not enter as an organizer. I entered as a wonk and then figured out how I could leverage a policy skill set to achieve a policy end to benefit a targeted group who I deeply on a moral and values level believe needs certain niche support that our broad policy that we pursue in this nation like don't technically or don't broadly support. So that is my tampon math girl math story. Mika, you had a point to make.
That is awesome. And
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to write a change my article on it if you're willing.
I would love that. I will find the
yes.
spreadsheet if I still have it somewhere in my
Amazing.
Google Drive.
Oh, what I was going to say is also not everything that has like and this is not anything super profound, but I need reminding of this often, is that not anything that has a title that can be formatted nicely on a resume counts as a skill or counts as experience. I spend a lot of my day working with like TikTok and Instagram creators who come from low-income communities or communities of color, and their expertise is being able to work very closely with their audiences and to be able to share and shape narratives online. And often they're underpaid or not valued or viewed as like anti-intellectual because they don't necessarily have the same resume as, say, like someone at a high-paying consulting firm. But what they do have experience in is like living through the child tax credit and then talking about it online with their family. And it's a different type of organizing. They don't necessarily think of what they do as organizing. I do. But really trying to like redefine what counts as like experience, what counts as being an expert. If you like help organize events at your church, that is event organizing, that is like organizing in your community. If you help with your like there's so many different things that count that might not necessarily be a line on LinkedIn that someone can like thumbs up.
I'll just say really quickly. So with the perspective of like, now I'm 33 and I'm looking back at myself, I have been an organizer for this whole time. I didn't call myself an organizer, nor was my job title organizer until community change. I don't know why folks are reluctant to use that word sometimes. I think like what Mika said is that we have a certain vision of what that means. And what we are not realizing is that organizing comes in so many different forms. So don't be afraid to like use it. Don't be afraid to own it. Don't be afraid to like reflect on your career and see like, oh, this was actually like power building. This was actually getting communities together. This was actually organizing. Even if it was like just a volunteer experience or an internship, that's part of it. Yeah.
Well, I think we are at time. I think we caught all the questions. I think there was a couple questions that we caught that went out. You all answered in the chat. Did we get it? I think we got everything. Does anyone have any other questions at this point?
Maybe just to close the dovetail on that last question. Mads put in the chat, if you are like, I don't feel like an organizer, I am in this policy program, how do I bridge the gap? How do I do some of that like, interstitial stuff? Mads has put in the chat a link to our weekly RO calls, and that is a great way to, in addition to the skills you're building in school, do some like hands-on stuff ahead of the election. And we'd love to have you. You're being organized right now. That's what's happening.
Well, I don't know about all of you, but I am so appreciative and grateful. I really want to thank Community Change. I want to thank all the students here today. As I say often, it's hearing what our students do, what our alumni do, what organizations do that give me hope in the world. So I just want to thank you all for the hours that you put in and the diligence to doing this work. So thank you very, very much.
Denise, can I plug one more thing before we call?
Sure.
This is not directly affiliated with Community Change, but we have worked with a lot of folks that have benefited from this. The Progressive Talent Pipeline is a wonderful resource that one of my friends works on pretty intensely, and I do believe Libby has benefited from as well. But essentially, it is a program that tries to support placing young progressives in congressional offices. There's a lot of support. There's a basic interview process, but essentially we can't start to see changes in legislation, and legislators can't know the important progressive demands of the people unless it's brought to their offices and it's put quite literally directly on their desks. And so the Progressive Talent Pipeline absolutely rocks. And I encourage everybody to apply if they're interested. And you don't have to stay on the Hill forever if you don't want to, but it's always nice to have some Hill experience on your resume, especially in this town. And the folks at the pipeline are wonderful.
Thank you. This was
Cool.
tremendous.
Cool. Thanks for having us, Denise. It was great to meet you all, and good luck. We've dosed you with links in the chat, so enjoy.
Thank you.